Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're digging into something really important, often, misunderstood. It's about the experiences and, well, the principles guiding Muslims who live as minorities in non-Muslim societies today.
Yeah, it's a complex area for sure.
And our guide for this particular deep dive is Zafarullah Khan. We're drawing from his book, Islam in the Contemporary World, A New Narrative. Just excerpts, but really potent ones?
Yes, his work offers a specific viewpoint on this.
Our goal here is to kind of pull apart his main arguments, maybe surface some of the surprising insights he has about the challenges these communities face and what he sees as Islam's core mission in, well, this modern context.
And he really doesn't pull any punches right from the start.
No, he doesn't. He opens with a pretty strong critique, frankly. He points out this paradox, Islam, which he clearly reveres, sometimes gets associated with really negative stuff, exploitation, even terror.
Right. And he places some of the responsibility for that disconnect within Muslim communities themselves.
He does. He suggests there's this tendency to be stuck to the past, as he puts it, a lack of real ijtihad.
But ijtihad, that's really key here. It means independent reasoning, interpretation. He feels that lack has kind of held Muslims back from developing a truly modern, peaceful way to live their faith globally.
Exactly. And that critique really sets the stage for why he argues a new narrative is, well, not just helpful, but actually necessary.
It's about facing the issues head on and finding a path forward that's rooted in a more dynamic understanding of Islamic principles.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. What's the reality Khan paints of Muslim minorities today?
Well, he gives us a number straight away.
Yeah.
Back in 2015, Muslims were like over a fifth of the world's population, about 1.7 billion people.
That's huge.
It is. And yeah, most live in Asia, South and Southeast Asia mainly. But you also have these really significant growing communities in Western Europe, the Americas, Australia.
Driven by migration, right?
Exactly. Large-scale migration from Muslim-majority countries to the West predominantly.
And Khan says that migration creates a pretty fundamental challenge.
Yes. Navigating the demands of modern citizenship, especially in these very diverse non-Muslim societies.
It's more than just legality, then.
Much more. He argues it's not just about having the right papers or even being loyal during, say, a war. Modern citizenship, he thinks, asks for something deeper, a real sense of solidarity with all your fellow citizens, regardless of their background or beliefs.
And this is where new thinking within Islam comes in.
Precisely. He notes how modern Muslim scholars are developing concepts like fi al-aqliyat,
Which translates to?
roughly jurisprudence of Muslim minorities. It's basically an effort to update Islamic legal thinking to apply faith principles within these specific contemporary minority contexts.
Makes sense. So what are some of the trickiest areas this new jurisprudence has to tackle? Loyalty seems like a big one.
Oh, definitely. That question of loyalty and even friendship with non-Muslims, it's something critics often seize on.
Because there are verses in the Quran, right? Ones that seem to say, well, don't take non-believers as friends or protectors over believers. Khan mentions some from chapters 3, 4, 5.
Correct. And he acknowledges that historically some classical jurists took a very strict line on this, almost seeing the default relationship as potentially one of conflict just based on the difference in belief.
But Khan argues that view is just outdated, not workable today.
Not just unworkable, but actually dangerous. He suggests sticking to that kind of narrow interpretation could, lead non-Muslims to see Muslims with hostility, almost justifying conflict, which could then tragically turn back on Muslims themselves.
So how does he reinterpret those verses then?
This is really central to his argument. He says those verses aren't a blanket ban on normal social ties or political cooperation.
Okay.
He reads them as prohibiting a very specific kind of loyalty, a religious or political allegiance, that actively harms the interests of the wider Muslim community.
So it's about betrayal, essentially. Loyalty that undermines your own community.
Exactly. And context is everything for him here. He stresses these verses came down when the early Muslims were quite literally fighting for survival against hostile forces.
So not a general rule for peaceful coexistence.
That's his point. Not intended for, say, minority life in diverse, stable societies today. He brings in this distinction. Hubby fitri versus hubby kadi.
Innate love versus creedal love.
You got it. He says Muslims absolutely can have innate love for non-Muslims, the kind that comes from, good interactions, shared human experiences, national ties, common interests. What they can have is creedal love, which is reserved for fellow believers.
And he finds support for this in the Quran itself.
He does. He points to examples where prophets are called brothers of their own people, even when those people didn't believe. He sees that as the Quran sanctioning friendly, even familial connections.
Okay, that clarifies the relationship side. What about the more formal legal and moral obligations of actually living in a non-Muslim state? Khan brings up Amaran here.
Yes, amava. It's a really important concept. Historically, it meant a contract, a pact of mutual security. Any agreement made under Aman with non-Muslims was considered absolutely binding, morally and legally.
Like a sacred trust.
Very much so. He even cites a saying attributed to the Prophet Muhammad about how seriously betraying a trust is viewed, like you'd be marked by it on the Day of Judgment.
And how does that ancient concept apply today?
Well, Khan makes a direct connection. He argues that the modern system of visas, residency, or becoming a naturalized citizen, that is the contemporary equivalent of a ma'aven.
Wow. Okay, so getting a visa isn't just paperwork, it's like making a solemn promise.
That's his interpretation. And the implication is huge.
Yeah.
It means that act creates binding legal and political duties. From this viewpoint, Islamic jurisprudence itself requires Muslims to obey the laws of their country of residence. It's a moral covenant.
So loyalty to faith actually requires loyalty to country within its laws.
As long as you can practice your faith within that country's constitutional framework, yes. That's the connection he makes. It's quite a direct application of classical ideas.
Which then leads to how he justifies Muslims not just living in, but also participating in non-Muslim states.
Right. He finds justification in the Quran itself, pointing to verses that talk about believers being minorities or needing to seek refuge. Verse 4.100 is interesting. It talks about finding refuge, wide and spacious, when migrating for God's cause, suggesting the condition itself isn't forbidden.
And he brings in modern scholars, too.
Yeah, people like Faisal Mawlawi and Yusuf al-Qaradawi. They argue this duty to your country means self-restraint, even if, say, your country of residence is in conflict with a Muslim-majority nation.
That's quite a stance. Does he go further? What about things like military service?
He does discuss that. Using arguments from Siyasa Sharia, that's like the policy of Islamic law, he lays out justifications for why a Muslim could even fight to defend a non-Muslim state.
What's the logic there?
Well, several points. One, Sharia doesn't explicitly forbid it. Two, the service itself doesn't necessarily promote unbelief. Three, it could bring real benefits to the Muslim community there. Protection, better standing, things like that.
And this ties into higher goals of the law.
Exactly. The Maqasidi Sharia, the overall purposes of the law. He also mentions Qaradawi's framework for allowing exceptions like participating in government to reduce harm, the lesser of two evils principle, based on established legal ideas like necessity or preventing injury.
There's also this idea of maslaha, public interest.
Yes, that's another key justification for, let's say, conforming behavior. Khan sees a powerful public interest, a maslaha, for Muslims being in the West, advancing Dawah.
Ah, Dawah. Now, this seems like a really fundamental shift he's proposing.
It is. He argues that most contemporary Muslim jurists are actually advocating for Dawah to effectively replace jihad as the primary mode of interaction, not just for minorities, but for the entire global Muslim community, the Ummah.
Replacing jihad with Dawah, how does he square that with, well, traditional views of jihad?
He clarifies that, in his view and that of many scholars, jihad historically was primarily defensive. Any verses that sound aggressive need to be understood in their very specific historical context, like the early Muslims facing extreme hostility, not as a general command for belligerence.
Okay, so jihad as defense, but Dawah as the main ongoing mission.
Precisely. He presents Dawah as the core duty, inviting non-Muslims to Islam's message, but crucially, doing it peacefully. And he stresses this peaceful invitation is perfectly compatible with modern ideas of citizenship and political liberalism.
So what does this peaceful Dawah actually involve? What does it look like in practice based on the Quran?
Khan breaks it down, drawing mainly from Quran 16.125. First, there's wisdom, or hikmah.
Meaning?
Being smart, basically. Using methods right for the time and place, understanding the local reality, being flexible, really getting to know people, integrating, working together, promoting coexistence.
Okay, wisdom. What's next?
Beautiful preaching, Mo'iza al-Hasana. This is about the attitude showing goodwill, being friendly, patient, sincere. The idea is your interaction should feel like a genuine friend offering good advice, not a lecture.
So build relationships first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then comes best argumentation, or jadal. This isn't about winning a fight. It's about clearing up prejudice, using logic, reason, evidence, being transparent, honest. Definitely not antagonistic communication.
Wisdom, beautiful preaching, best argument, and the last one.
And this one's non-negotiable for him. No coercion. He hammers this home, citing the famous verse, "Let there be no compulsion in religion."
Faith has to be freely chosen.
Completely. So, Dawah, especially in a non-Muslim context, must be free from any kind of force, trickery, or pressure. It has to be an honest invitation.
And the goal isn't necessarily to convert everyone.
Not necessarily universal conversion right away. It's more about presenting the message clearly, based on what he calls Islamic universalism, this idea that all humans share a common origin, nature, purpose, and respecting everyone's fundamental right to choose based on knowledge.
This connects to another interesting point he makes about Darul Islam, the abode of Islam. How does that fit into a minority context?
Right. He brings up this classical view, attributed to Al-Mawardi, that if a Muslim can freely practice their religion in a non-Muslim land, that land can, in a way, become part of Darul Islam.
Meaning?
Well, the implication is pretty radical. Living there might actually be better than migrating away, specifically because your presence, your example, might lead others to understand Islam, maybe even embrace it.
So presence itself becomes a form of dawah. He gives a modern example of this kind of thinking.
He does. He mentions a fatwa from the Deoband Seminary in India advising Muslims not to slaughter cows for Eid al-Adha out of respect for Hindu neighbors. He sees that as a progressive, humane, context-sensitive interpretation part of this new narrative.
But he doesn't shy away from the tensions either, right? The contradictions.
Not at all. Yeah. He points out this dissonance. You have Quran 4.97, which seems to say, if you can't practice freely, migrate.
Yeah.
Yet, he observes, many scholars or activists facing persecution actually seek asylum in Western countries.
Countries they might then criticize or even act against.
Exactly. It highlights this real-world tension between maybe an ideal scriptural instruction about migration and the practical reality of needing safety and refuge, even in places viewed critically from within their own framework.
Yeah, that's a complex knot to untangle.
It really is.
Okay, so let's try and zoom back out a bit from this fascinating dive into Khan's arguments. We started with his critique of maybe stagnation.
Right, the need for ijtihad.
Then we looked at the challenges of modern citizenship for minorities, how he reinterprets sensitive things like loyalty and friendship.
The binding nature of commitments like Amarian through visas or citizenship.
The justifications he finds for living in and participating in non-Muslim states, even militarily in some cases.
And then this really central shift he advocates, from jihad as the primary status to dawah.
A dawah built on wisdom, good communication, reason, and absolutely no coercion.
Exactly. His work offers this very specific, reasoned pathway for how Muslims can, and he argues should, navigate life in diverse societies while holding on to their faith.
It definitely provides a framework. And it leaves you, the listener, with a thought to chew on, maybe building on that tension he raises at the end.
Yeah, how do people balance these things?
Yeah.
Deeply held religious beliefs, which might sometimes seem to point towards separation or migration if things get tough with the everyday, practical demands of just being a citizen, participating in civic life, living alongside neighbors in really diverse places.
What does Khan's perspective suggest about whether that balance is even possible? And if it is, what are the tools? Is it the wisdom, the relationships, the non-coercion he talks about? Can those actually bridge the gap in our complex world today?
It's a fundamental question, really, about identity and coexistence in the 21st century.